I first came to Royal Court in 1975 as an assistant electrician in the theatre upstairs, because a friend of mine from university, John Tyndale, was the lighting designer of the theatre upstairs, and I came and did 4 or 5 fit-ups, in which I was just moving chairs around and occasionally being asked to plug in a lantern, as they were called then. And I remember dismantling hinge and bracket set, for instance. And then, they had this triumph. We kind of came in, and after about an hour of moving the set around, they came and said, "Oh, you brutes!" So that was not very Royal Court, really, when you think of the other things we've done. And then everything went quiet for about 15 years after that. Didn't seem to get any breaks at all as a writer. And then suddenly Max asked me into the theatre for a meeting. And curiously, I was at the same time meeting with Catherine Johnson, who subsequently wrote Mamma Mia. We were having this whole conversation about how broke writers are, and she said, "Oh, you're lucky you've got a meeting with Max. I've been seeing Lindsay Posner." Of course, she turned out to make $1 million or several millions out of that. But yeah, I had a conversation with Max in which he, in the way that he does, he asked me, he threw this postcard at me, which was of a cricket match with people playing in knickerbockers and curved bats and stuff like that. And he said, "What's the date of that?" And I guess I said it's 1780, and he flipped it over, and I was right. And it was a kind of test, and so he said, "Well, would you like to do a play for us?" And I said yes, and he said, then next week he phoned up and said, "Would you like to be we've got a job called literary associate, where you have a desk and a phone and you talk to playwrights." And I said yes, and I never saw the desk or the phone. I just had to meet a lot of playwrights and read a lot of scripts, which I did for the next 11 years. And then the court in that time did 2 of my plays. Then after a while, they kicked me upstairs, and now I'm on the board. So again, you're not taken seriously as a writer, So you go through these different phases in the life cycle. Do you know the one that really stands out for me is Stoning Mary by Debbie Tucker Green? I thought it was the most incredibly underrated play. I thought it was a fantastically clever play in which there were kind of 3 different situations, all of which normally occur to black people, and she'd had this great alienation device of having it all done by white people. And I was so upset by that play that I just couldn't even hang around afterwards. I thought it was really on the money. But I could also say Top Girls by Carol Church. I remember the first production of Top Girls and being halfway through that surreal scene at the start, and everybody in the audience was thinking, what the hell can happen next? Where is this going? And then it did go somewhere, and then finally, it ended up with this very conventional natural 6 scene between the 2 sisters. And I thought, well, she's gone through 3 different styles in this play. And the critics again said, what a terrible structure for a play. And of course, I'm now known for doing my dramatic workshops on dramatic structure. And one of my great examples is Top Girls, because it's a takeoff of a 3-act play. And for years and years, I said, well, I don't mean that Carol Churchill actually intended it as a takeoff of a 3-act play. And then sometime in the around about 2000, I had a conversation with Carol. I said, what were you thinking of when you wrote Top Girls? She said, oh, it's a takeoff of a 3-act play. So I always that was also a really sensational, it was the most extraordinary event. The great Holly Granville Barker did 3 seasons, which were all serious plays, which were commercial disasters. So in a way, our the antecedent of what we do is there, and the court has always, it's managed to survive. It's survived that kind of commercial disaster. It survived the Luftwaffe. It survived attacks on it in the 1980s. It survived the fact it was sinking slowly into the underground rivers, and Stephen Dawley rescued it from that. So there have been various rescue acts over the years. Of course, the 1950s Rescue Act, which started the company. So it's managed to survive, and it's survived through being a series of contradictions. It's a left-wing theatre and a right-wing borough. It's, in my view, an excellent house for comedy, and it's always done very serious plays. It's had, over the years, it's called the Royal Court, which is an aristocratic name and an egalitarian establishment. So it's somehow that, I suppose, those contradictions are fruitful and have always yielded some kind of dialectic between what the what the building is and what happens inside it. And that, I think, has been one reason. There's partly a series of bloody-minded people have managed to keep the building open, which is the most important thing. And it's always operated within this rather strange and rather English set of confrontations or compromises. Sometimes the confrontations come to the fore, and people get angry about sponsorship or whatever. Most often it kind of bumbles along in a series of compromises. I mean, George Devine originally thought, when he started the company in the 1950s, it was going to be partly new work, but also there was a lot of, he did all this mask work, and we had writers like UNESCO and Beckett. There was a definite continental influence was meant to happen, and in some way that part of it fell to one side. But there's still, that undercurrent is still there. You still get what you might call experimental work, which is a different current from the court's social realist tradition. So it's managed to embrace all these things, but in a rather vigorous way. I suppose at the moment we now have compared with what we had in the 1990s, we now have a plush, modern building in which, to a certain extent, my feeling about it is that in the old days people came to see a play. Now, if you didn't do a good play, then you play to 12% or something. I don't think we ever have playing to 12% anymore, because people come to the building, they come and see the show at the Royal Court, and in the old days, you'd go around the corner to the Fox and Hounds and drink there. Now, of course, everybody drinks in the bar of the theatre, and that's a whole different culture. So I think its future depends on its ability to transcend these exciting contradictions, which are somehow endemic within its nature. When we did the Libertine here in 1994, and we'd had a couple of previews, and the reviews were kind of not bad, okay. And I was working in the theatre as literary associate. There was a script meeting, and I remember going out of the old artistic corridor and not being able to open the door, and I pushing it. What's wrong with this door? And I pushed a bit further, and there was someone sitting there because the queue to get in was now going all the way down the stairs. In the old days, you used to start the queue at the box office, and it would wind all the way up the stairs. In a really successful play, you couldn't get out of the artistic corridor, and that was a delightful, sort of successful memory. And I also, in script meetings, the one I remember chiefly is near the start of Stephen Daldry's reign. We had a meeting every Monday morning, it was then. And I'd read this play on a Sunday night, which I was very, very excited about. And Stephen came into the script meeting looking a bit grim and had clearly not slept very well, and was smoking more than usual. And he said at the start, instead of the usual business of going around and looking at plays, he said, I'm worried. We need a play to go downstairs. We've got nothing for the summer, and I think we're really stuck. And I just waved this thing, and I said, Mojo. There's a play called Mojo by Jess Butterworth. I read it last night. This is our summer hit. And Stephen, he just stopped everything, stopped the meeting, phoned up the agent and got the rights, and then turned to me and said, you better be right. But that was quite a fortuitous moment that I'd been asked to read that script. I think anyone could have picked it, actually, but it happened to fall into my bag at that moment. So, those were the particularly strong memories. But I also have memories of the Royal Court abroad, which is working for the International Department, which has been one of the great thrills of being part of the Royal Court, is going to places like Uganda, Palestine, Cuba, to work with writers there. Often writers who, in the case of Uganda, you were going there because all the previous generation of writers had been shot by Idi Amin. There were no senior playwrights. And you had this playwriting culture. They were desperate for models to escape from what they were asked to do by the Museveni government, which was kind of TIE plays and dance dramas and so on. They wanted to write Royal Court plays. They wanted to write plays about, social realistic plays about an emerging country coming out of a traditional country, a traditional African country. And we had, over the first 2 weeks I went there, I went with Hetty MacDonald, we had this idea of taking a ritual, as in Hamlet, where you have the burial is interrupted and the play is interrupted, and taking the idea of a basic social ritual and setting that up, and then having something which would stop it. And we did played around this on the first day, and I said, it's not going bad. let's do the second day as well. And something extraordinary happened on the second day. They itemised all these burial rituals and circumcision rituals and things. And we then, from that, when they said, well, let's have something that's so powerful it can stop this ritual dead in its tracks. And this just took off. It just went like wildfire. A year later, we had 14 plays, all of which had this basic shape, the same basic shape to them. And it just, in some way, inspired them. Again, it was a lucky strike. And then going to Bethlehem, I remember very clearly with Elise and Philida Lloyd. And we had we were in a hotel in Bethlehem on Manger Street, which is the main thoroughfare through to Bethlehem. And there had been a couple of explosions which I'd vaguely heard during the lunch hour. And we were in this, it was we were in a sort of eating in a sort of cellar. Couldn't really work out what it was. We went back upstairs to carry on the workshop, which was in a room on the second floor. And I had my back to the window. And what I was doing was a session called Physicalizing Action, because the problem with the plays that the Palestinians wrote was mostly they were very long on people sitting in chairs talking to each other, but they didn't have much physical action. And I said, we're going to look at how you physicalize action. I suddenly realized behind me this riot had started, and there were about 200 Palestinian youths throwing stones at the Israeli soldiers, and somewhere in the middle, the poor old Palestinian police were trying to stop this happening. And as I was speaking, it got larger and larger. It became a TV crew, and suddenly people were firing plastic bullets, and people were kind of going down injured. And I was doing this session on physicalizing physical action, and I said, guys, come on, I don't think we can carry on. It feels really weird to be doing this. And one of the writers there, who was an old politico, he said, oh, we have a riot every day. We've never had a playwriting workshop before. You must carry on. If the Royal Court didn't exist, I wouldn't have had a career as a playwright. I wouldn't have seen some of the finest plays of the last 30, 40 years. And I wouldn't have travelled around half the world with Elise.